I was 20 years old when I took a placement at a rural agricultural university program. Part of it involved living on-site at a research farm, about 40 minutes from the nearest town. It was the kind of place where the cricket sounds at night felt louder than anything you heard during the day. Most students avoided the placement because it was considered too isolated, but I welcomed the solitude. I thought it would be the perfect opportunity to focus on my work without distractions. The farmhouse I was assigned to had been empty for some time before I arrived. The university called it pre-used housing, which sounded much better than the reality. The place looked abandoned, despite being technically maintained. Furniture remained scattered throughout the rooms, positioned in ways that suggested someone had stepped away in the middle of a task and never returned. A chair sat pulled out from the dining table. A book rested open on a shelf. Even the kitchen felt strangely occupied, as though someone had cooked there earlier that day. I dismissed the feeling as nerves. Moving somewhere completely unfamiliar could make anyone uneasy. The first few days, I tried to make the farmhouse feel like my own. I unpacked my belongings, rearranged some furniture, and kept the television playing in the background whenever I was inside, just to make the silence less noticeable. But the strange thing was that the house never truly felt empty. There were moments when I would return from working outside and find small things slightly different from how I left them. A cupboard door would be open, a chair would be angled differently, or an object I had placed somewhere would appear somewhere else. Nothing major enough to prove anything, but enough to make me question my own memory. One evening, while organizing supplies near the back entrance, I found an old set of keys hanging on a hook that I hadn't noticed before. I assumed they belonged to a previous occupant, but what bothered me was that one key had a faded label marked barn. I never found out what it opened, because I decided not to test it. At the time, I couldn't explain why, but something about the idea of opening another part of that property felt wrong. The hallway outside was worse. Crossing it at night felt like walking through an invisible wall of cold air. I assumed the building had poor insulation and planned to report it eventually. Instead, I adapted by sleeping under extra blankets. The farm itself consisted of several fields, storage sheds, animal enclosures, and a massive barn that dominated the property. My daily responsibilities often required me to cross the grounds before sunrise. That was when I noticed something odd. The farm was unnaturally quiet. Rural areas are never truly silent. There should have been birds, insects, distant animal noises, or the sound of wind moving through trees. Yet certain sections of the property felt completely muted, especially near the barn. Whenever I approached that area, it was as if the surrounding environment held its breath. About a week later, another strange incident occurred. I had started leaving a bottle of water on my bedside table each night. One morning, I picked it up and nearly dropped it. The bottle was ice cold, despite the mild weather outside. I checked every vent and window in the room. Nothing explained it. That was the first moment I stopped finding the situation amusing. Around the same time, the farm animals began behaving strangely. The sheep and cattle didn't panic near the barn, but they consistently avoided it. If a gate was left open, they would circle around the structure rather than pass beside it. More unsettling was how they did it in silence. The property also had a black Labrador named Ranger. He was intelligent, obedient, and usually fearless around livestock and machinery. Yet he refused to enter certain areas of the farm. Whenever I approached the barn, Ranger would stop walking and stare at it. Sometimes he would sit beside me and fix his gaze on the upper windows of the structure for several minutes at a time. One evening, just before dusk, I experienced my first sighting. I was returning from the equipment shed when movement near the barn caught my attention. At first, I assumed another student had wandered onto the property. Then I noticed the figure. I had the overwhelming sensation that it had already been watching me. I blinked, and whoever or whatever it was ran away. I didn't tell anyone. I wasn't even sure what I had seen. A few nights later, I woke suddenly, around 3 in the morning. Ranger was standing beside my bed. His ears were raised, and he was staring toward the bedroom doorway. The hallway beyond was dark. I listened carefully. At first, There was nothing. Then I heard footsteps. They seemed to move through the hallway outside my room before stopping directly beyond the door. I waited. The footsteps never continued. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I fell asleep again. In the morning, I convinced myself I had imagined the entire thing. But when I opened my bedroom door, I found muddy footprints on the hallway floor. The trail ended abruptly in the middle of the corridor. As the weeks passed, the sightings became more frequent. The figure never approached directly. It remained at a distance, appearing near the fields, beside equipment sheds, or reflected faintly in windows after sunset. One afternoon, while cleaning a storage room inside the farmhouse, I discovered an old logbook tucked inside a cabinet. Most entries detailed routine farm operations, but several pages near the back had been torn out. The remaining notes referenced repeated complaints about cold spots, missing tools, and unusual activity around the barn. The final intact entry simply read, "Seen again tonight, watching from the loft." No explanation followed. I showed the book to one of the senior staff members the next day. The moment he saw it, his expression changed. He quickly dismissed it as an old maintenance journal and advised me not to worry about it. His reaction bothered me far more than the journal itself. Not long afterward, a fellow intern casually asked whether I had ever noticed a figure standing near the barn line at sunset. The question caught me completely off guard. I hadn't mentioned my experiences to anyone. When I asked what he meant, he shrugged and admitted he'd seen someone strange a few times, but didn't like talking about it. That conversation confirmed I wasn't imagining things. The most disturbing event happened near the end of my placement. I was conducting a routine equipment check after dark. Ranger accompanied me as usual. Everything seemed normal until he suddenly froze. Then I saw movement. The figure emerged from the darkness. For the first time, it was close enough for me to distinguish details. The person remained perfectly still. I couldn't tell who they were or what they wanted. Ranger let out a low growl, unlike anything I had ever heard from him before. Then he turned, grabbed my sleeve with his teeth, and began pulling me toward the house. I didn't resist. The moment we reached the porch, I looked back. The figure was gone. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to convince myself that there was a normal explanation. Maybe someone had been checking the property. Maybe a worker had gotten lost. Or maybe it was just a person passing through the area. But the way Ranger reacted stayed with me more than the figure itself. He had always been calm around strangers, yet that night he reacted as if he recognized something was wrong before I did. I never found out who that person was or why they were near the barn. After that night, I stopped going outside after dark altogether. The farmhouse no longer felt threatening, but it didn't feel safe either. The placement ended earlier than expected due to administrative restructuring. When I packed my belongings and left the farm, I felt relieved to put the experience behind me. Yet years later, I still think about that place. I don't know why multiple people described the same thing. But what troubles me most isn't the stranger's intent. It's the possibility that they had been there for years, quietly watching everyone who came and went, unnoticed by most, and ignored by those who knew better. Even now, whenever I find myself somewhere unfamiliar, I pay close attention to the silences, the cold spots, and the things that seem slightly out of place, because sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't what you see, it's what remains hidden. It was supposed to be a quiet night drive on roads I knew like muscle memory. No traffic, no pedestrians, nothing that should have been out there at that hour. Little did I know, I was about to experience something that would permanently change how I viewed that stretch of road. I'm in my mid-20s, working a fairly routine technical job in a small urban town. Most evenings, I take drives to clear my head after spending long hours indoors. There's a stretch of back roads outside town that I've always preferred for exactly that reason. It's quiet, winding, and completely detached from anything resembling nightlife or activity. Most nights, it feels like the world simply stops existing out there. The route consists of long curves, shallow hills, and open stretches bordered by grass and brush. You can drive for several minutes without seeing another set of headlights in either direction. It's the kind of road where your thoughts become the loudest thing around you. I had driven it countless times without incident. That night began like any other. It was a little after 10 in the evening. The sky was clear, visibility was excellent, and the road was almost completely empty. My speed stayed moderate because wildlife frequently wandered near the roadway after dark. About 20 minutes into the drive, I noticed something unusual. The silence felt different. Normally, I'd pass the occasional farmhouse light or spot distant vehicles crossing nearby roads. That night, there was nothing. Even the usual glow from homes scattered across the countryside seemed absent. The darkness felt heavier than normal, as though the road existed in its own isolated pocket. I remember turning down the radio completely without realizing why. Something about the atmosphere made me want to listen. The only sounds were the engine and the tires rolling across the pavement. I was approaching a familiar section where a right-hand curve crests a small hill. Beyond it, the road dips before bending left along a narrow guardrail. It was a spot where I always slowed down out of habit. As I reached the crest, something near the guardrail caught my attention. At first, I assumed it was an animal standing too close to the road. I eased off the accelerator and prepared to pass carefully. The closer I got, the more I realized this wasn't a deer or any other wildlife. It was a man. He was crouched beside the guardrail in an oddly unnatural position. At first, he faced away from the road. Then, very slowly, he turned toward my approaching headlights. His clothing appeared minimal and completely unsuitable for the cool night air. What stood out most wasn't his appearance, but his stillness. He wasn't pacing, signaling for help, or looking around. He simply remained there, motionless, as though he had been waiting. A wave of concern immediately replaced my confusion. Maybe his vehicle had broken down somewhere nearby. Maybe he was injured. I briefly reached for my phone and considered calling emergency services. Then I looked back up. The man was no longer standing still. He had turned completely toward my vehicle and stepped into the road. He sprinted directly toward my lane. For a moment, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. It felt completely disconnected from normal human behavior. There was no attempt to wave me down or get my attention. He was simply running at the car. I instinctively slowed even further, unsure whether I should stop or continue moving. The distance between us vanished alarmingly fast. Within seconds, he had reached the edge of my headlights. At that point, I could see his face. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't fearful either. It looked intensely focused, almost vacant, as though he was completely fixated on the vehicle itself, rather than the person driving it. A chill ran through me. I grabbed my phone again, this time more urgently. Before I could decide what to do, he was suddenly directly in front of my vehicle. I slammed the brakes. The car lurched forward as the tires fought for grip. For a split second, I genuinely thought I was about to hit him. Instead, he stopped just short of the hood. The image remains burned into my memory. The man standing in the middle of the road, illuminated by my headlights, staring directly through the windshield. Then something even stranger happened. He tilted his head slightly, almost as if studying me. The moment lasted only a second or two, but it felt much longer. Then he moved again. He darted toward the driver's side and began running alongside the vehicle. There was no contact with the car, but his proximity was unnerving. I could see him in my peripheral vision, matching my slow roll forward. His movements looked frantic, yet strangely deliberate at the same time. That was enough. I pressed the accelerator and surged forward. The car quickly gained speed, and I focused entirely on creating distance. As I accelerated down the straight stretch of road, I checked the mirrors repeatedly. For several moments, he remained visible behind me. The sight made no sense. No normal person should have been able to maintain that pace for that distance. Eventually, the road curved, and the figure disappeared from view. I kept driving. The rest of the trip passed in a blur of concentration and controlled breathing. Every shadow near the roadside caught my attention. Every curve made me glance into the mirrors again. I didn't stop until I reached the familiar streets closer to town. Even then, I remained parked for several minutes, replaying the encounter over and over in my mind. In the days that followed, I tried to rationalize what had happened. Perhaps it was someone in a state of extreme distress. Maybe an individual under the influence of something. Maybe there was a perfectly ordinary explanation hidden somewhere inside an otherwise bizarre encounter. Yet none of those possibilities fully accounted for what I witnessed, especially the speed and the certainty with which he moved. I stopped using that route after dark, not because I was terrified, but because I no longer trusted the comfort of familiarity. That road had always felt predictable, until it wasn't. Sometimes I still think about that night, and how ordinary everything seemed, just moments before the encounter. The road was empty. The conditions were perfect. Nothing appeared out of place. Then, in the span of a few seconds, a place I had known for years became somewhere I never wanted to see again. And to this day, whenever I drive alone at night, I pay far more attention to what's standing at the edge of the headlights than I ever did before. My name is Adrian, and I was 27 at the time of this trip. My brother Jamie was 29, and we decided to drive from Ohio to Portland. We wanted the kind of long road trip people talk about but rarely actually do. No flights, no shortcuts, just open highways and changing landscapes across the country. At first, everything felt exactly like we expected: long, quiet, and uneventful. The drive west was smooth for the most part, stretching across endless highways and changing scenery. We settled into a simple routine during the trip. Every few hours, we would stop somewhere along the highway to stretch our legs, grab snacks, and refill the tank. Some stops were nothing more than small gas stations, surrounded by empty roads. The kind of places where you walk inside, hear the door chime, buy a couple of drinks and bags of chips, then get back on the road. Those short breaks became some of the most memorable parts of the journey because they gave us a chance to slow down and actually take in how far away from everything we were. We took turns driving, stopping only for fuel, food, and quick rest breaks along the way. The only thing that stood out happened during some of the more isolated stretches of road. Every now and then, a vehicle would appear behind us and stay there for a surprisingly long time. The first time it happened, neither of us thought much about it. We were driving through a long, empty section of highway, and a set of headlights appeared behind us. The road was quiet, so it was noticeable, but nothing about it seemed unusual. Then we stopped for fuel about 30 minutes later. When we got back on the road, the same thing happened again. A car appeared behind us. At first, we laughed about it. We joked that we had picked up a road trip companion. But after it happened several times, we started paying closer attention. Whenever the headlights appeared, one of us would check the mirrors and try to figure out whether it was actually the same vehicle. Most of the time, we couldn't see enough details to know. It could have been a different car entering the highway from another entrance, or someone simply traveling in the same direction. Still, it was strange how often it happened. After the fourth or fifth time, we stopped treating it like a mystery and started treating it like a coincidence. Long highways naturally create situations where the same vehicles cross paths repeatedly, especially when everyone is following the same major routes. By the time we reached the West Coast, we had mostly forgotten about it. We drove through scenic areas, coastal highways, and long stretches of open landscape. Everything felt normal again, and the earlier incidents became nothing more than a funny conversation between us. We made it through San Francisco as the sun began disappearing. That was when the return journey started feeling more stressful. Jamie fell asleep in the passenger seat shortly after we left the city limits. I stayed behind the wheel, focused on following the coastal highway south. After several days of driving, I was more tired than I realized, and I was relying heavily on navigation to keep track of the route. Within the first hour outside the city, the GPS started becoming less reliable. It wasn't broken, but it kept trying to redirect me. The route would change because of traffic updates, road closures, and changes in estimated arrival times. Sometimes it suggested getting off the highway, then immediately recalculated when I stayed on the main road. At first, I assumed it was just poor signal. That made sense because we were moving through areas where coverage was inconsistent. Then I noticed the arrival time kept changing. One moment it would estimate one arrival time. A few minutes later, it would add more time. Then it would adjust again. Looking back, it was probably because the app was constantly recalculating based on my speed, traffic information, and whether I followed its recommended route. At the time, though, it was frustrating. Eventually, I stopped paying attention to the GPS and focused on road signs instead. That worked until I reached a highway split late at night. The navigation suggested one direction, but the signs clearly indicated another. I decided to trust the physical signs and continued along the marked route. The problem was that the road immediately became unfamiliar. There were fewer lights, fewer businesses, and fewer landmarks. I wasn't lost, but I no longer had the same confidence that I knew exactly where I was. For nearly 20 minutes, I didn't pass another vehicle, or gas station, or restaurant. Just a long stretch of highway surrounded by darkness. That was when I noticed a familiar-looking billboard on the side of the road, advertising a motel. A few minutes later, I saw another sign for the same motel. At first, I thought I had somehow passed the same sign twice. But after looking more carefully, I realized it was probably just a repeated advertisement. Businesses often place multiple signs along long stretches of highway to catch drivers' attention before exits. Still, it made me realize how difficult it was to judge distance and time when driving at night. Then I noticed headlights behind me. This time, instead of joking about it, I actually felt a little uneasy. Not because there was anything threatening about the car, but because I was tired and alone on a road I didn't recognize. Eventually, I decided to wake Jamie. I didn't explain everything immediately. I just asked him to look behind us and tell me if he noticed anything. He rubbed his eyes, looked into the mirror, and frowned. Has that car been behind us for a while? The fact that he noticed it immediately made me laugh. I explained that this had happened several times during the trip. Jamie looked back again. It might just be someone going the same direction, he said. And honestly, he was probably right. For several minutes, neither of us said much. Then Jamie checked his phone. No service, he said. I checked mine. Same thing. That wasn't unusual. Rural highways often have dead zones, especially along coastal routes and mountain areas. The bigger issue was that we weren't completely sure where we were. The GPS wasn't giving useful information, and because we had been driving for hours, we started second-guessing whether we had missed a turn. A while later, we passed a highway marker showing the distance to a nearby town. The number surprised me because it seemed farther away than expected. I kept driving. After another stretch of road, we saw another sign mentioning the same town. For a moment, we both thought we had somehow gone backward. But after checking the map later, we realized the road curved through the same general area and there were multiple signs referring to the same destination from different directions. At the time, though, exhaustion made everything feel more confusing. I slowed down at the next intersection and decided to stop relying on the GPS completely. When I checked the mirror again, the vehicle behind us was gone. This time, it didn't feel strange. We assumed they had probably taken another exit or turned onto another road. I continued driving until we reached an area with more traffic and clearer signs. The GPS eventually corrected itself. The route became familiar again, and the rest of the journey went smoothly. Nothing else happened. Looking back, I think the entire experience was a combination of exhaustion, unfamiliar roads, poor visibility, and the way long-distance driving can distort your sense of time and distance. When you're behind the wheel for hours, especially at night, ordinary things can start feeling unusual. Some drives are memorable because of the places you visit. Others stay with you because of the small moments when everything feels slightly off. And that brings us to the end of this video. If you enjoyed this story and want more unsettling encounters, unexplained mysteries, and true horror experiences, make sure to subscribe to Deep Horror channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. And if you have a strange experience of your own that you'd like featured on the channel, feel free to share it in the comments or reach out to us via mail.